In gardening, you can start a lot of different plants from seed, and it can be very economical. You can grow an entire annual vegetable garden with just vegetables that you start from seed, and the same goes for flowers. But if you've been with me for long, you'll know that I love perennial plants. So perennials are types of plants that you either start from seed or you get as plants. You plant them once and then they continue to live for many years, giving you many harvests and a lot less work because you're not sowing packets of seeds every year for those crops and those beautiful displays. And now that we are in autumn, winter time, this is a good time to be thinking about putting in perennials because a lot of them, like fruit trees and berry bushes, and even smaller plants like strawberries, you can get them as bare root plants. And that means that they arrive in the post without any soil around their roots. And that makes them very cheap to send. And so you can get really good deals in winter. And then you would either heel them in when they arrive or get them planted. And then you can start your very own perennial garden, food forest, or even an orchard. And I have 8 bare root fruit trees on the way, and they'll be arriving sometime soon. Now, I have only ever grown 1 to a few fruit trees at a time, but now that I have a bit more space at home, I want even more. And so that comes into this entire idea of expanding from a small garden to a larger garden. And what do I do? Does it make it more complicated when you're growing a lot more different types of fruit trees? And do I need to get several different varieties so that they can cross-pollinate one another? So many questions. And so I have been speaking with Wade Muggleton, the author of this book, the Orchard book, and he is a very knowledgeable fruit grower. So I've posed some questions to Wade for both of us, and he has very graciously responded. Now, the first one was, what is an orchard?
Hello Tanya, well welcome to our orchard here in the Shropshire Hills. As you can see, it's been quite a fruitful year this year, and we've had a vast crop here. So to answer your first question then, what is an orchard? Well, an orchard is really just a place where fruit trees grow. It could be a garden, it could be an allotment, it could be a field. I've got 130 varieties here in my slightly eccentric Shropshire collection, but it could just be a few trees in your garden or on your allotment up to anything on a field scale. Orchard is a lovely word, but we don't need to be too precious about the definition. It's a place where fruit trees grow. So if you'd like a tour around my orchard, Tanya, it's 600 feet up here in the Shropshire Hills. As I say, there's 130 odd varieties. It's a mixture, mostly apples, but I think there's 106 different apples and about a dozen different plums and a dozen different pears and a few odd things like quinces and medlars, green gages, etc. So it's a mixture with the apples of mostly eating apples, but there is a selection of cookers. There's some cider fruit. This is Harry Master's Jersey we've got here. And there's a couple of trees of Dabinet, which are particularly laden at the moment. But it's very high up here, as I say, 600 feet. It's quite exposed, slopes gently to the northwest, so it's probably not ideal for an orchard, but seems to be quite healthy. So I think the exposure perhaps scours away a lot of disease, a lot of spores, and disease problems probably get scoured away by the winter winds. 7 years ago, the whole site was just a bald, overgrazed sheep's field. So everything you see here is 7 or less. There are a lot of trees that were put in at the beginning, but there's some slightly younger ones who are sort of 4, 3 or 2 years old, and it's pretty much full up now. Most of the trees are on a rootstock called M111, which leads to a fairly good sized tree, but it's also supposed to be very wind firm, very good anchorage in windy conditions, and it is very windy here up in the hills. So as I say, we've sort of got some younger trees added in the gaps in between, and I do turn my sheep out in here, hence the need for these guards to stop the sheep eating the trees. But there's basically one each of most of the varieties. There's a couple where there's two of each, but we practice a range of sort of organic pest control measures. So we've got a lot of these bird boxes just on fencing stakes throughout the orchard, and blue tits and great tits will nest in those, and then they can eat the caterpillars that would otherwise damage my fruit trees. So as I say, we do the whole thing on sort of organic-ish principles. We're not registered organic, but it's basically a chemical-free, unsprayed orchard.
I think that there's this perception that you need a lot of space to grow an orchard. Is that true? If you have a smaller garden, can you still grow fruit trees?
So do you need a lot of space then to grow fruit trees, or can you actually grow fruit trees anywhere? Well, the answer is yes, you can. It's about getting the right tree for your location. So this is a step over here in my front garden. It's about 6 foot long probably, and about 18 inches high, and it's got a reasonable crop of apples. This is a variety called Sunset, so you certainly don't need the headroom to be able to grow fruit trees. And then over the back here we've got two other step overs. So they're a Victorian idea to sort of make a decorative edging around often vegetable gardens or kitchen gardens, but they work really well in small spaces. And then across the back of the plot here we've got some pears on a cordon and an espalier. So again, they're only about 3-4 foot high and probably no more than a foot 18 inches deep from front to back. So you can fit fruit trees into any space, anywhere, and it's just about finding the right one for your situation. We've even got a fruit tree in a barrel by the front window, so right tree, right place.
Suppose a person is interested in planting a fruit tree, a few fruit trees, an entire orchard. When, in your opinion, is the best time to be planning and planting those fruit trees?
Whenever you're inspired to do so, really. Perhaps on a rainy, miserable day when you can't be outside doing other things. But when it comes to planning, it is absolutely worth putting the hours in, doing your research, looking at books, deciding on varieties you want, looking at rootstock charts to make sure you get the right size tree for your situation, sort of planning it out, working out your spacings, what's going to go where. It really is worth putting that time in, rather than being whimsically sort of inspired to grab some end of season bargains and make it up as you go along. It's definitely worth planning it properly and using specialist fruit tree nurseries where you'll get good quality stock and good advice if you need it on how to plan your orchard. But yeah, put the time in and get it right, because it's a long-term investment. It's going to be with you in the long term, so it pays to get it right. You don't want to spend several years investing in something that ultimately disappoints you.
Wade, you have so many fruit trees, all of those apples, all of those trees. What do you do with all of the fruits?
So yes, Tanya, we do end up with an awful lot of fruit from our orchard, and what we do with the vast majority of it is we make homemade apple juice. So we produce maybe 120 bottles of this a year, and we stash it away in the shed, and it lasts us through the winter. So it's far more sustainable than buying imported fruit juice from halfway around the world. So we've got this set up where we have an electric scratter which chops up the fruit into a pulp, and you then put the pulp in the press. This is a little barrel press which I made myself out of local oak, and you then squish the apples. It comes out of here, and you can either pasteurize it. We have a small pasteurizer, which means that once it's pasteurized it'll keep for maybe 2 years in a bottle, or you can ferment it and make a bit of cider, or you can freeze it. If you've got room in the deep freeze, just chuck it in sort of plastic milk cartons and freeze it. But it's a great way of utilizing a lot of fruit which perhaps won't keep, surplus harvest, of turning it into a really usable high quality product. So we don't sell it commercially, we just make it for the family and friends, but it's a great thing to do, and a top quality product.
Wade, you have a new book out called The Orchard Book. Can you tell me a little bit more about it and where people might be able to find it?
That's right, Tanya. I've got a new book out. I tried to distill sort of 20-25 years worth of orchard experience and knowledge, countless courses and workshops I've taught and articles I've written, and I tried to put it all together in a book. So it's partly how to sort of plan and plant an orchard, the things you need to consider, how to select varieties, root stocks, but there's also a fair bit of orchard history in there. Britain obviously has a very long and rich orchard history, and there are anecdotes and stories to do with varieties and fruit and the orchard people from the past. So hopefully it's a good mixture of some how to do as well as some good sort of orchard background as well.
Thank you so much for answering my questions, Wade. They have been incredibly helpful. Your book, again, is just filled to the brim with knowledge about growing fruit trees and growing orchards. And there are some ideas in there that are just genius. I love the archway that you've made with 2 dwarf apple trees, and I will be appropriating that most likely in my home garden. It's just beautiful. And I will leave information on your book down below for everyone who's watching. Head down there. There'll be a bit of information on where you can find Wade and also his book. And do leave any questions that you have for Wade down below as well. And I'll ask him to come over and answer them sometime very soon. Thank you for watching. Thanks again, Wade. And I'll see you next week for another video here on Lovely Greens. Bye for now.